Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Studium Generale evening. Oh, now I'm here. I will repeat also for the people at home. Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome at this Studium Generale. Today, the theme is Alone Together. Today, we welcome you, first of all, on behalf of Studium Generale Groningen and the Theatre Association A-Way Productions, who will present their new theatre play, Beautiful Mess, or their theatre production that is inspired by Sally Rooney's Normal People, and it will be featured in June. But something about Studium Generale. This is part of the Hanse University of Applied Sciences and the University of Groningen, and together they organize innovative and multidisciplinary activities in the field of science, culture and society. The program contains lectures, films, debates and more. And maybe you did not know of this event by the newsletter, but if you want to be informed on upcoming lectures, you can subscribe to the newsletter. And if you go to the Studium Generale website, you can subscribe. My name is Marie-José van Tol. I work as a professor here at the university, where I also study psychiatric problems. So also I'm very interested and keen to listen what we will learn tonight. Let's talk you through the program, Alone Together. According to the UKrant, 3 out of 4 students at the University of Groningen are lonely. But loneliness is as common as it is misunderstood. What exactly is loneliness? And what does play a role, or how does loneliness play a role in depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts? And how should we talk about loneliness? During this evening, we will hear different perspectives on this matter. From cultural psychologist Luzia Heu, psychiatrist Hanna van Loo, and youth researcher Diana van Bergen, you will learn about this theme, and they will give a short lecture. After the lecture, there will be room for questions, and they will be answered. But first, we start with a scene from Beautiful Mess. And I'm very sorry for the people who are watching this evening from home. There's no audio to this movie, so you can, or this film clip. You cannot hear the audio, but after the film clip, you can hear everything that happens here in the aula of the University of Groningen. And now, the show begins.
You should go and talk to someone calm. Are you sleeping at all? There's like a service, it's free, you might as well.
Self-dislike.
0. I feel the same about myself as ever.
1. I have lost confidence in myself.
2. I am disappointed in myself.
3. I dislike myself.
Mark 3. I dislike myself.
Kamal, I love you and I really hate seeing you like this, but I don't think this relationship is working out anymore.
Anxiousness.
0. I almost never feel anxious about anything.
1. I feel anxious sometimes, but the reason is very clear.
2. Sometimes I get anxious for no reason at all.
3. I'm experiencing an almost constant fear.
Mark 3. I'm experiencing an almost constant fear. Insomnia.
0. I sleep as I always do.
1. I have some trouble falling asleep.
2. I have some trouble falling asleep and wake up often during the night.
3. I barely sleep.
Mark 3. I barely sleep. Loss of interest.
0. I enjoy my hobbies and daily activities.
1. I feel less motivated in my hobbies.
2. I feel demotivated for the things I normally enjoy.
3. I don't feel any pleasure with any activity during the day.
Mark 3. I don't feel any pleasure in any activity during the day.
I never even replied to the last message he sent me.
When you lose someone to suicide, it can be natural to wonder whether you've done everything in order to help them. I'm sure everyone in your friends' lives feeling the same way right now.
Yeah, but at least other people try to help you.
Like, I want to be there for you, but you just won't let me, and I've tried, but I feel like I'm holding on to other, frankly, legitimate worries that have existed before all this.
Rob and I, we hadn't really kept up with each other through college. Like, he was back in Sligo and I was up here and everything, and well, I think I feel guilty that I wasn't in touch with him more.
I understand that.
And I can't sit on these worries because you're feeling so low. It's just not fair, and like, I love you and I really want to be there for you, but I don't think this is working out anymore. Actually, I don't know if it was working out before, and now all this has just exacerbated it. So.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Very sorry to hear that, Paul.
I don't normally click with a lot of people. I struggle with that actually.
Is this a new feeling or is it familiar to you?
It's familiar. I'd say in school I definitely felt that feeling of isolation that people seem to like me. And here I don't feel people like me that much. Like Rob, my friend, who, I wouldn't say we clicked on a very deep level or anything, but we were friends, you know. And I wouldn't say we had a lot in common in terms of like interests or anything, and definitely not politically if we ever really examined that. But all that stuff just didn't matter in school because we were in the same group of friends, you know. And he did some stuff that I wouldn't have been a fan of in terms of like with girls or anything.
Ugly, flat-chested bitch.
But we were 18, you know. We acted like idiots, and I think I just felt a bit alienated from all that stuff, and I think I thought if I moved here, I'd fit in better. I'd meet more like-minded people, but that just hasn't. And well, I left Sligo thinking I could have a different life, but I hate it here, and I can never go back because those friendships are gone, and Rob is gone, and I can never see him again, and I can't get that life back. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. We will now move on to the lectures. I would first like to welcome to the floor. I'll introduce the three speakers and then they will present their talks. They will just go one after the other. First, we will hear from Luzia Heu. She studies cross-cultural similarities and differences in loneliness, the origins of chronic loneliness and experiences of not fitting in social norms and loneliness. She also communicates her insights through videos on loneliness across cultures. So that's a website you can visit, in blog posts, for example, on Psychology Today, and a podcast, which is in development. After that, Hanna van Loo she is a psychiatrist and an assistant professor at the Department of Psychiatry at the University Medical Center Groningen, will give a lecture. Her research focuses on the origins of depression and anxiety disorders, including loneliness, and their intergenerational transmission. And lastly, Diana van Bergen will talk. She holds the chair Understanding and Preventing Suicide and Suicidality Among Youth. She is interested in elaborating our social psychological understanding of suicide and suicide-related behaviors of young people particularly socially vulnerable youth, and establishing effective suicide intervention for these groups. I'd like to welcome Luzia Heu to the floor.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me fine, probably like this. Thank you very much for being here tonight, despite the rain. I'm very happy to talk about loneliness today, after this quite intense theater clip, in my view. So I try to keep it as light as I was planning to do. So yeah, I will talk about loneliness, but before I talk about loneliness, I would like you to actually think about what loneliness is for you. And the reason why I ask you is that most people actually experience loneliness at some point in their lives. So chances are very high that most of you have already experienced loneliness in your lives. Just give this a thought for a second. Okay, maybe you have something in your mind now. I will not put you on the spot because the audience is also a little bit smaller now. But I will immediately go to the definition of loneliness that is very much used in the scientific literature, namely that loneliness is the unpleasant feeling that results from perceiving a discrepancy between the relationships we actually have and the relationships that we desire. And what we desire in our relationships is, on the one hand, dependent on our own personal characteristics. For instance, people who are more introverted often have different social needs and desires than people who are more extroverted. But it is, of course, also influenced by cultural norms. So, for instance, in the many individualistic cultures nowadays, we really idealize romantic relationships a lot. So here you can see we often have ideals of another person needing to be perfect or completing us, which is also quite fostered by Hollywood movies. And that, as you can see here, can then give rise to this perceived discrepancy between what our romantic relationships perhaps can actually give us and what we would like them to be. And this can lead then to relationship dissatisfaction and then, in turn, to loneliness. So that is a scientific definition of loneliness. But as most scientific definitions and also most scientific studies, this definition has been developed in a Western context. And Western contexts typically are a bit more individualistic in terms of culture. So here people tend to spend relatively much time alone, make decisions relatively independent from their families, and also they are quite likely to live alone. The question is then, do these people experience loneliness and define loneliness in the same way as people in cultures where it's very common to actually live together with family, to spend very little time alone, and to really make decisions more intertwined with other family members? So to figure that out, a couple of years ago, we did a study, actually with Nina Hansen, who is also in the audience today. We interviewed people, lay people, in different cultural contexts, including, for instance, Bulgaria, India, or Egypt. And we asked people to tell us what they understood when they said, I feel lonely, how they would describe to someone who has not really felt lonely before what loneliness is, for instance, to a child. And what we found was that across these different cultures, people typically said that loneliness was a subjective experience that really was shared across different cultural contexts. So this is important because that means loneliness is a feeling. And this feeling is separate, is different from the objective state of being alone, aloneness, or also from having few social relationships, which is social isolation, we often call it. And that was the same across different cultures. And then it became a bit messy. Why? Because different individuals tend to define loneliness quite differently. If you turn to your neighbor and ask them here in the audience how they exactly experienced loneliness, it is quite likely that they would have a slightly different definition of how they experience loneliness and how they would describe it from you. But still, we hardly saw any cultural differences. I will just give you a few examples of what people can mean when they say, I feel lonely. They can, for instance, mean, I do not feel understood. Or they mean, there is a barrier between myself and others. So even though there are others around, I always feel like there is a glass wall. I really feel very far away. or they can perceive a lack in their relationships. For some people, loneliness really is a lack of support, a lack of understanding, a lack of closeness, a lack of guidance, perhaps. And then yet for other people, loneliness feels as isolation, or loneliness feels as really being separated from close others. And these are just a few of the many definitions that people gave for what loneliness means. But then again, the range of different definitions was very similar across different cultures. And then if we want to summarize all these diverse definitions of loneliness, typically they are the feeling that result from perceiving that our relationships cannot offer us something that we would expect or like. And this is again in line with the theoretical definition I provided at the start. If you nowadays hear about loneliness in public also, most of the time, loneliness is now presented as a very severe health risk, and I'm not going to go into much detail because I think, Hanna, you will talk a bit more about the different health outcomes that can be there. The question then is, do we now all need to panic? Because I said at the beginning, most of you have already probably felt lonely. The question is, do you now need to be concerned very much about your health? And obviously the answer is probably no, because there are probably different types of loneliness experiences. And in fact, many theorists, many loneliness researchers have argued that loneliness is an experience that is very much inherent to our experience as human beings. Why? Well, we are born alone, we die alone, we make our own experiences in between, and we don't know for sure if someone else has exactly the same perception as we have. And if we become aware of this, this can cause feelings of loneliness. We can share it, but we never know for sure if another person perceives something the same way as we do. So it's inherent to human life, just as moments of sadness are arguably inherent to human life. And at the same time, loneliness has also been suggested to be adaptive. It has been suggested to be an adaptive signal to reconnect with other people when our social relationships are at threat. So if there is a sort of risk that we might become isolated, we feel lonely, so that we immediately try to fix our relationships. And researchers have argued that this is because, evolutionarily speaking, it was a big advantage to be in groups. If we were separate from the group, that was a major threat to our survival, and this is why we have developed this emotion of loneliness. So we see there are loneliness experiences that seem to really have a very negative impact on our health, but at the same time, loneliness also seems to be inherent to human life and somewhat adaptive. And accordingly, in the literature, what is sometimes distinguished is transient loneliness from chronic loneliness. So basically, loneliness experiences that are relatively short-lived, let's say they take perhaps a couple of hours to a couple of days. But then on the other hand, chronic loneliness experiences, in the interviews that I sometimes conduct or analyze, I see that there are quite some people who say, I've been feeling lonely all my life. I don't even know really, I cannot tell you a specific point in time where I felt lonely because I don't really know how it feels not to be lonely. Or it comes back a lot of times. So we see there are really differences in how long loneliness can take, but also in how often it comes back. Another distinction into different types of loneliness experiences is by cause for loneliness. So you can see here we have emotional loneliness on the one hand. Maybe you've heard of that distinction. Emotional loneliness is a loneliness that flows from not having anyone that we truly feel close to and can open up to. So at least one person would be needed, let's say, to fix this type of loneliness. On the other hand, social loneliness describes that we do not have enough social contacts or enough social relationships. And then existential loneliness is the loneliness that I've already described to you. It's this loneliness where we realize that our experiences might be inherently different from those of others, so we just don't know if they make the same experiences. The thing is, this typology is used a lot and cited a lot, but in my view, it's very oversimplified. Why? Loneliness is an extremely heterogeneous experience. It can flow from many different sources, so we could, in the end, really distinguish many, many different types of loneliness by cause. And I just want to illustrate this to you. What you will see soon are the coding trees from the same research project that I presented earlier. So here, this is an overview of different causes that have been identified in the literature, together with causes that we identified in people's interviews. And you are not expected to really be able to read the different points, but I just want to give you an impression. So these are causes that are in a person's relationships. These are causes that are in the individual themselves, for instance, personality characteristics, or just in general personal tendencies that often develop based on our childhood history, and situational causes. And I will now, in the following, give you a few examples of such causes so you get a bit of a feel for what I mean. If we talk about relationships now in public, most people discuss a lack of social connection, a lack of social contact as the cause for loneliness. You will see that very often loneliness and social isolation really are mixed up and discussed together. Actually, even the World Health Organization tries to tackle loneliness and social isolation together, and in many languages there are no separate nouns for these two, or the different nouns are used interchangeably. But what I always say is that the relationships we have can make us as lonely as the relationships that we don't have. Why? Because we can have conflict, and we can have disharmony, and we can feel rejected, and we can lack all kinds of relationship qualities. We can lack support, guidance, etc. And this can really trigger loneliness all the time. Also, of course, if we didn't get support, for instance, in our childhood, if our parents were not very available or not very responsive, this can also lead to loneliness also later in life, also as adults. Even if you have grown out of the relationships with your parents, you might still feel these consequences of your childhood relationships. When we talk about relationships, we usually think of the relationships we have with other people, but it seems that also the relationship with ourselves can really be influential when it comes to loneliness. I often hear people say that they felt very lonely when they did not really accept themselves or could not communicate their needs to others very well. And as soon as they started to really accept their own needs a bit better and start to communicate them also to others, rather than seeking only approval from others, they started to feel less lonely. So people often said that they started feeling more comfortable with themselves and also with making their own decisions and walking through problems by themselves, because they were before very dependent on what other people said. That's, of course, one extreme. You can also go to the other extreme, which is that you don't share with others at all, or that you try to figure out everything yourself. Or what I sometimes see in interviews is that people tell me, I always feel like I have a sort of mask. So I don't really open up with others much, and I feel like I always hold back. So that can also undermine that you can really create a deep connection with other people. And something for which I don't have a Peanuts picture. For some reason, I don't know, while preparing this presentation, I constantly ran into Peanuts pictures. But something for which I don't have a picture here is actually something that can, or a mechanism that can underlie a lot of loneliness, which is that we have a tendency, a personal tendency, to feel rejected by others, or to really pick up on others being a bit hostile towards us. And this sensitivity can lead to us then again acting in more hostile ways towards others, which can make these others withdraw. Or in the first place, we perceive our relationships as more negative than they are, which can make us feel lonely, but also can make us ourselves withdraw. And this is an outcome that has been found for difficult childhood experiences, earlier rejection in life, but also loneliness in self, actually. So people who feel lonely seem to develop these mechanisms as well often. So these are personal aspects. Of course, there are also situational causes. If you lose a close other through bereavement, for instance, or someone passes away, but also through a breakup, of course, this is also a very relevant cause for loneliness. Something that people often don't talk about much is that giving birth to a child and then staying at home with a newborn can also really lead to loneliness. So there are a lot of situations that can actually lead to loneliness. Also, dealing with problems or decisions is something that I encountered a lot in interviews. People struggling with financial problems made them feel very alone with this problem, or with a sick relative made people feel very alone in this situation. Or also decision making. I heard from many managers, as you can see also illustrated in this comic, I heard from many managers that it's not a manager, but it's about decision making, that they felt very lonely in this position of having to make decisions and being accountable for that. And something that I address a lot in my own research is not fitting in with social norms as a reason for feeling lonely. Because if we do not fit what is normative, we are more likely to be considered weird by others and to be socially rejected. Here we see only in math problems can you buy 60 cantaloupes and no one asks what the hell is wrong with you. Because obviously if we do something that is not normative, other people react and they will often reject us or show in some way that we are wrong. Then we also feel wrong ourselves, or we don't feel understood, or we hide what we actually are like because we try to fit in with social norms. This is something that I have often heard by people who were in the closet, who didn't disclose their homosexual, for instance, homosexual sexual orientation. In a heteronormative society, they said, I always run around with this kind of secrets, and I kind of act around everyone. And that made them feel very lonely for a big part of their lives. Okay, now we are through with some causes. You got the message, there are a lot of causes. This is just a selection, there are many more. Now, for the second part, let's say, of my talk, I want to debunk a few misunderstandings about loneliness. And first of all, I would like you to think, consider this a multiple choice question, which of the following statements is or are true? People who feel lonely are usually socially isolated. Loneliness is mostly a problem of old people. Loneliness has strongly increased over the last decades, and loneliness is mainly a problem in individualistic societies. So I would like you to raise your hand. Do you think that people who feel lonely are usually socially isolated is correct? Yes, I see one hand, very, very courageous. Nice, thank you. No, this is not correct. We have already seen that there are many different causes for feeling lonely, and people who are lonely, social isolation is one risk factor for loneliness, but it is not the case that most people who feel lonely are also, or would count as socially isolated. Loneliness is mostly a problem of old people. Who thinks that this is correct? No one? Maybe you got me. Okay, no, it's also not right. But I will walk through all of these points a bit later. Third one, loneliness has strongly increased over the last decades. Ooh, okay, big majority of people say this is true. No, we actually don't know. I will tell you about it soon. Last one, loneliness is mainly a problem in individualistic societies. Also quite some hands. Also not correct. Also, it was a mean question. Everything was wrong, or at least partially wrong. Loneliness is mostly a problem of old people. Is somewhat, it's not entirely wrong, let's say. Why? Because elderly people tend to report more loneliness than other age groups. Intuitively, people usually think that loneliness is mainly a problem among elderly people because people are less mobile, so people are more often socially isolated, are often retired, close people have passed away, and that can, of course, lead to loneliness. But adolescents and young adults are often found to also be lonelier than other age groups, and sometimes even lonelier than elderly people in quite some studies. And why is that? I mean, they are not socially isolated, right? But of course, they run into a lot of risk factors for loneliness. So one might not feel that close to one's family anymore, but one has not established very close friendships yet or a very close network yet. There are a lot of transitions, moving away from family. Young people are also particularly sensitive to not fitting in with social norms and rejection. And people might also be quite insecure at that age, so then it's more difficult to actually show your true self and create an authentic relationship. So these are quite some risk factors for loneliness. Loneliness has strongly increased over the last decades. This is something that is interestingly really claimed everywhere, even in research articles. But the truth is that we actually don't know because there is very little data about loneliness from before 2000. At least there is very little longitudinal data, so studies that really follow individuals over time. There have been a few studies that try to estimate time trends in loneliness from individual studies. Some of them find slight increases in loneliness, some of them find slight decreases in loneliness, and some don't find any changes in loneliness. So in any event, what we can say, next to we don't know, is that there doesn't seem to be very clear or strong evidence that there has been a massive increase in loneliness, even though social isolation probably has increased. But the feelings of loneliness we don't know. And then who is likely to feel lonelier? Well, I said, are people in individualistic cultures lonelier than in collectivistic cultures? Intuitively, most people would say it's people in individualistic cultures because, again, they are more isolated. I talked about it at the beginning. In individualistic cultures, people are more likely to live alone, spend time alone, make decisions independently from others, whereas in collectivistic cultures, family ties are usually much stronger. What do the data say? Well, actually, as you can see, there are quite some studies that suggest that loneliness is reported more, so it's basically stronger in more collectivistic cultures. There are also a few studies that suggest the opposite, namely that loneliness is slightly higher in more individualistic samples or cultures, but here effect sizes are pretty small. So in general, what we can say, I just got a sign that I have only 4 minutes left. Generally we can say that we do, again, not have strong or clear evidence that people in collectivistic cultures would be very protected from loneliness in comparison to those in individualistic cultures. You might ask now, why is that? Well, I can just give you one explanation, perhaps another one would fit more. But what we can say, of course, on the side of individualistic cultures is that social norms really encourage people to spend time alone and be in isolation, and that has, of course, the flip side of really not feeling well. I said basically social norms encourage people to spend time alone and live alone. That has the flip side of social isolation as well. So the risk factor of social isolation is probably higher in more individualistic cultures. But then, as we have seen, there are many different causes for loneliness and many risk factors. And some of these risk factors may be more prevalent, more frequent in more collectivistic cultures. For instance, in collectivistic cultures, people are typically expected to spend a lot of time or to at least not cut their family ties, so to really keep these family ties, or also have relationships with in-laws. That, of course, prevents social isolation, but at the same time, if people are unlucky and are actually in a family with low relationship quality, they are bound to relationships in which their loneliness is constantly triggered because of disharmonies and conflicts. That is one explanation. Basically, I just put a picture here, not all mothers-in-law are bad, which maybe proves the point by the opposite. Another explanation might be that is often provided is that people in more individualistic cultures, even though they spend more time alone, they are also more used to spending time alone. Because the study has also found that among elderly people in the UK, living alone became less strongly associated with loneliness when living alone in old age also became more normative, became more normal in the second half of the 20th century. And another explanation is also that often in more collectivistic cultures, the range of what is acceptable behavior or what are acceptable characteristics is a bit narrower, and social sanctions can be quite strict if one does not adhere to this. So for instance, often it is expected to be heterosexual, to get married, to have children, and to have a partner that the family also approves of. And if you deviate from this, there are all these consequences of not fitting in that I mentioned earlier. So this risk factor may sometimes also be more prevalent. And then in some, we see that there are very little differences between the different cultures, or sometimes more loneliness in collectivistic cultures. What can you take away from everything I've said? I'm almost done. On the one hand, we see loneliness is very diverse. So if someone tells you, I feel lonely, maybe it's good not to tell them to hang out with others more, because that is very often probably not what drives their loneliness. And also, don't be offended. Don't think that it is necessarily about the relationship with you. But it might be wise to actually think about what is the cause for this person's loneliness, perhaps, and is there a solution for this person's loneliness? And that also holds for interventions, because nowadays many interventions, or almost all interventions, try to bring people together to have random social contact, which can sometimes even trigger more loneliness if people are confirmed in that other people do not understand them and that they are always different from others. So here again, also we need more diversity in loneliness interventions that actually target why people feel lonely rather than the symptom of loneliness. And it has already been said, but if you're interested in getting more information, really firsthand, also from research participants in different cultures, please have a look at lonelinessacrosscultures.com. There are videos about loneliness definitions, causes for loneliness, but also about how people deal with loneliness. So especially if you're also interested in how people cope with loneliness and the strategies that they have developed, please have a look here to also learn from other people's experiences and wisdom. And with that, I would like to thank you very much.
Good evening. I would like to start with asking you a question. And if the answer is yes, you may raise your hand, but you don't have to do that. So my question is, who of you knows someone with mental health problems? Okay, that's actually more hands than I expected. Although, I must say, thank you, I expected actually almost everyone knowing someone with mental health problems because they are very prevalent, highly prevalent. So about 50% of all of us will face mental health problems during their lives. And that can range from quite mild conditions like a specific phobia to more severe and chronic conditions like addiction or schizophrenia. And especially depression and anxiety disorders are highly prevalent. And so about 25% of us will face that during their lives. And there is also a strong link between loneliness and depression and anxiety. And I would like to tell you more about that. I think that is important because we know that feelings of loneliness, but also lower levels of loneliness, feeling socially connected, having a strong social network, is protective against mental health problems. So I hope that if you understand more about this link, that it will be easier for you to connect with people who go through a hard period, who have mental health problems, so that they may feel less lonely. But before I go into this link between loneliness and depression and anxiety, I would first like to tell you a bit more about what I mean when I talk about depression and anxiety. So when I talk about depression, I refer to major depressive disorder. That is a mood disorder, and a mood disorder which is characterized by a low mood. If I see patients, I work a lot with patients with depression, they tell me that their mood is depressed or sad, or they feel low, or sometimes empty. And they say it's almost continuous. So even when positive things are happening, they still feel sad or low. Another characteristic that you actually may have heard during the clip of the A-Way productions is loss of interest. So people lose the interest in activities that they usually enjoy. They don't like them anymore. Then there's a range of additional symptoms that may also occur, and that means that there are sleep problems, fatigue, concentration difficulties, but also typical are very negative thoughts about yourself. So feelings of worthlessness, for instance, and what Diana also will talk about later is suicidal thoughts. And then these symptoms need to be present for more than 2 weeks, and you also see that people lose their capacities to function in the sense of problems with work or problems with social activities. So this is what I refer to as I talk about depression. Then we also have anxiety disorders that are slightly different. They are characterized by feeling anxious. And one of the most prevalent anxiety disorders is generalized anxiety disorder, in which people feel very anxious, but they also worry a lot about multiple things in their lives. And these feelings are hard to control. They also face additional symptoms like, again, fatigue, sleep problems, concentration difficulties, but also feeling tense. And these symptoms are usually present for more than 6 months and also lead to problems with functioning. And now we know that there is this strong link about loneliness and depression and anxiety. And I would like to tell you a bit more about that in my first part of the talk. Then I would like to tell some potential mechanisms. So how does it work? Why do we see so much depression and anxiety associated with loneliness? And also what we do in clinical practice about it. So from multiple studies, and Luzia already referred to it, we know there's a strong link between loneliness and mental health. So this is a summary of more than 100 studies. And we see in the studies that loneliness is most strongly associated with depression and with anxiety, but also with general mental health. And also, interesting for people who have no problems at all, with lower well-being. So also when you don't have any mental problems, people who have more loneliness, they experience their well-being as lower. And so this is related to quality of life, for instance, and feeling that you have a meaningful life. Apart from that, loneliness is also associated with physical health problems, like cardiovascular problems, with sleep problems, cognitive problems, even with dementia. So the World Health Organization mentioned this as a threat to our health and installed a commission to foster social connectedness. So maybe they mix up a bit with loneliness and social connectedness, but it's clear that it is a major concern for our health. So what about this link between loneliness and then depression and anxiety? To understand this a bit better, I would like to take you back to a period about 5 years ago, the start of COVID. It may feel already quite long ago, but I'm sure you all remember that in the winter of 2020, we had this outbreak of COVID-19, then still very unknown virus, and that led to all sorts of measures and regulations to reduce the spread of the virus. And that mostly was through social distancing measures. So maybe you remember that the university was closed, schools were closed, we were not able to host more than 3 people at our homes, gyms were closed, you could not go to the hairdresser, etc., etc. Even we had even this evening curfew. So yeah, still I find it a bit funny to talk about it because it was so strange then, but we had all that kind of things. And as a psychiatrist, I was a bit worried about people's mental health because I know from all my patients how important social connectedness is for people's health. And so with a group of colleagues from the UMCG, we started a study in lifelines. And maybe you've heard of this. Lifelines is this big population study in Groningen, Friesland and Drenthe. And we follow about 160,000 participants for more than 30 years to monitor their health. And when we had this COVID outbreak, we thought we need to monitor people's health during this period. So we started sending out digital questionnaires about their physical health, their mental health, but also if they suffered from COVID infections, and also including loneliness. And I will tell you more about that. We did that right from the start of the pandemic in March 2020. And then we followed that, we continued sending out questionnaires until October 2022. So we have a lot of measurements, more than 30 assessments of people's health in that period. And more than 75,000 people responded to these questionnaires. So we had a lot of data. In these questionnaires, we also asked 3 questions about loneliness. It's a very simple measure of loneliness, but we asked them, how often do you feel that you lack companionship? How often do you feel that you feel left out or isolated from others? And people could respond with never or almost never, sometimes or often. So in total you could get a score from 0, no loneliness at all, to 6, the most loneliness points. And then when we looked at how loneliness developed over time, we saw this figure. So this is the results of one loneliness item, and the people that said often to this question, they said, yes, I often lack companionship. Well, what is striking if you look at this, you see that the percentage of people that's on the y-axis is relatively low. So about 3-4% of the population said, yes, I often feel lonely in this period. But you see that it goes with ups and downs. And especially you see 3 peaks in the beginning, so March 2020, then in the winter of 2021, and in the winter of 2022. Well, what could be an explanation? One thing could be winter sucks anyway. Everyone stays at home. But of course, during COVID, we also had these lockdowns. And actually, not only from Lifelines, but also other studies across the world, we see an association between these lockdown periods and people's perceived loneliness. And then, of course, my question as a psychiatrist was like, how strongly is this associated with people's mental health, so with depression and anxiety? Oh, one thing before I go to that, about the percentage. It seems like quite low, right? 3 to 4% of the entire population. But when we looked in a subgroup here, the people living alone, it's much more. So 3 to 4 times more often people experience that they feel lonely. And so we actually saw quite a bit of differences in subgroups of the population. And Luzia also mentioned in the young people that was also more experienced than in older people. Then we look at how this relates to depression. And so here you see again a timeline. And we see a few lines that are colored with a green line with a 0. That's the people with the lowest loneliness scores. Then the red line is the people with intermediate loneliness scores, and the purple line is the people with the highest loneliness scores. And on the y-axis, you see the proportion of people having major depressive disorder. So what you actually can see from this picture is that for the people with the highest loneliness scores had about 14 times more often depression than the people with the lowest loneliness scores. So indeed a very strong association. And we also said that this association got a bit stronger over time. So it looked like that the association between these two, loneliness and depression, got a bit stronger. And that's also what we expected, because we thought, well, if people are exposed to loneliness for a longer period of time, they may actually be more sensitive to develop depression. The same we saw for generalized anxiety disorder. So this is the same figure, but then for generalized anxiety disorder, a 10 times higher prevalence in the people with the highest loneliness scores as compared to the people with the lowest loneliness scores. So indeed, strong associations. And then, of course, the question is, like, how does this work? Why do we see this strong connection between loneliness and depression and anxiety disorders? Well, there are basically 2 potential pathways, from loneliness to depression and anxiety, and from depression and anxiety to loneliness. And studies show that both seem to exist as well. So here I mention a few potential mechanisms. This will not be complete, but just to give you an idea. So one of the ideas is that loneliness is a stress factor for us. So as Luzia also mentioned, well, people are evolved to be in social groups, and being socially isolated can be very stressful for people, especially when it would last for a bit longer. That may lead to higher levels of stress, which in turn may also lead to poor health behaviors like smoking or substance abuse. But these higher levels of stress, do all sorts of things to your body. So you will see higher levels of stress hormones, you will see that your immune system changes, and this in turn may lead to physical and mental health problems. Then you also have the other pathway from depression and anxiety to loneliness. And this is what I notice in clinical practice, is that as I already told you a bit, people with depression often have very negative thoughts, negative cognitions. They feel worthless. They feel like, I'm not worth it. People will not be waiting for me. So I can they are better off without me. This is typical for people to report when they feel very depressed. Then they also don't feel pleasure if they do social activities. So there's not really a reward to be socially active, because they don't experience joy. So all of this may lead to social withdrawal, and social withdrawal then again could lead to loneliness. For anxiety, it could be a bit different. But you see often in people who are very anxious that they also may be scared of other people, especially when you have social anxiety disorder. You may be scared that you will make a fool of yourself, and that you prefer to avoid social situations or avoid situations in which other people may look at you, like giving a presentation. You can also be scared of public spaces or having a panic attack in a supermarket, but also when you visit friends. So the effect is that people may start avoiding going out of their homes or social activities. So also this is a pathway which may actually increase levels of loneliness, and then you can get in a vicious circle in which Depression and anxiety may cause loneliness, and loneliness may cause depression and anxiety. So lastly, what I would like to tell you is, how do we address this in psychiatry? Because we know it's a very important risk factor. So we know that it's true for many people, but not for all people. So first we start to investigate to what extent loneliness plays a role in the disorder that the patient has. Then we try to involve people's social network. So we invite them to the clinic, we invite them to meetings, and we also try to increase the social support that the patient may receive from their relatives or from their friends. Also, we look at the quality of relations, because what we also heard in the last lecture, it's quite important that the quality of relations is good. And we can address this with systemic therapy, with interpersonal psychotherapy. So there's several types of therapies that you can use to improve quality of relations. Sometimes people feel that they are a bit shy or sub-assertive, and then we can also address this, improving people's social skills, for instance with psychomotor therapy, assertiveness courses. Another point that Luzia also mentioned is that people may think very negatively about themselves, unrealistically negatively. And so we try to improve that with, for instance, with cognitive and behavioral therapy, so that people feel a bit more certain about themselves and a bit more secure, and that they feel that they are actually worth it to have social relationships. And the last point that we also take care of is work and study related activities, because also that is important for having a meaningful way of spending your days, but it's also very important for many people to have social connections, work, study, that kind of activities. Note that these are only a few things that we do in the psychiatric treatment, but these are the things that are specifically directed at people's social networks and loneliness. So then I would like to finish my talk with a quote from Marion, one of the main characters in the novel Normal People. I read the novel, I liked it very much. I think what you can see is Marion had quite a rough time when she was younger in connecting to other people. Well, I see the people from A-Way Production saying yes. She had a rough time, she was isolated, she was bullied. But still, she had at some point in her life, she had some meaningful social relations. And by the end of the novel, she thinks by herself, no one can be independent of other people completely, so why not give up the attempt? I hope with my talk I have showed you a bit about how important social connectedness is for your health and for your mental health. And with that, I would like to thank you for listening.
Thanks everyone for coming. I'm Diana van Bergen. My talk will be mostly about suicide and suicide prevention in relation to loneliness. It is, as with the other topics, but perhaps even more so with this one, a very heavy topic. So it's completely fine if you feel emotional or affected, and if you feel it is getting too much to bear, feel absolutely free also to leave if you would like to. Of course, we're happy to have you here in the room, but if needed, feel free to do so. I will talk about the following things. I will say a few things about how frequent suicidal thoughts and behaviors are among young people. My talk is mostly about young people. And I also say a few things about what we know about the link between suicidality and loneliness, in both from research findings and theory. I will talk a little bit about psychological theory that is, I would say quite well known in the field. And then I will end with discussing what we can do. So mostly talk about interventions. And I try to find the links, I would say, the links between where suicide prevention meets loneliness interventions, or vice versa. So first about, the topic of my talk, suicidal thoughts. I've just I've made a note of expressions that people use when they refer to feeling suicidal, or, well, they can also say it when not acutely suicidal, but it's quite linked. So these are the expressions that people use. For instance, I can't bear this anymore. I don't want this any longer. My life will never be good. I won't bother you any longer. Or it is better for everyone if I make myself disappear. I'm a burden to my family. No one will miss me. I'm alone and I'm nobody. Now, as you can see from those examples, there's actually a huge variety in the ways that people express themselves when they feel suicidal. I think this also signals that there is not really one type of suicidality, or there is not one suicidal thoughts. There are quite many of them, and they're quite heterogeneous, and they're also likely to mean different things to different people. So I would say the variety among those expressions should encourage us to discuss further with the person who expresses it what they actually mean. And this is very difficult for most of us, because to actually go on and ask someone, sorry, what did you just say there? Were you thinking of suicide? That is a huge step for most of us. It's very difficult to do. But the good news is you can actually practice with it. I have some links at the end of my talk for really hands-on training that you can actually practice those questions. And please don't be afraid that it's dangerous, because that's actually a myth in suicide prevention research. It's a myth that if you pop the question, like, do you think about suicide, that you would encourage someone to make an attempt. That's really well established that it's not true, and most people find it very comforting to talk with someone about this. Of course, I'm also here for science. So I'll talk a little bit about the epidemiology of suicidal thoughts and attempts and suicide death. So here you can see that suicidal thoughts, or ideation as we call it, is the consideration or the desire to end one's own life. Of course, this can vary from very passive thoughts about this to quite actively wanting to die. We also know that in the Netherlands, as in many other Western countries, we see an increase of suicidal thoughts. For instance, from about 15 to 18% of young people about a decade ago who endorse that they have suicidal thoughts, to about 22% in 2022. That, of course, was pandemic time, Corona time, but the research has been replicated more recently, and the numbers still haven't gone down. So we're still seeing this. And I should say that this includes anyone who endorses it from sometimes thinking about suicide to frequently. Yeah, so it's those 22% is everyone in that in those categories. Then a suicide attempt, where someone deliberately intends to take their own life. Here we see that is less prevalent, fortunately. We see 3 to 8%, 8.8% of young people who self-report to have ever made an attempt. That's all self-report figures, I should say. And here we can I've also noted who are the high-risk groups for suicidal thoughts and behaviors, suicide attempts. We see that is more common among girls than among boys. We see that also youth with psychological disorders are a high-risk group. but also, for instance, LGBT youth or foster children are a high-risk group. Yeah. Now, about suicide death, here we see that, fortunately, it is statistically rare. Of course, every suicide death is a huge tragedy, and we don't want to see it. But yeah, the statistics show us that fortunately it's quite rare. Huh? So for suicide deaths for every 100,000 young people in the Netherlands, but it's becoming more frequent, becoming more common when you enter emerging adulthood. So there we see, like for youth among 15 to 30, becomes about 7.7 per 100,000. And here we see there are different risk profiles. So here we see that boys and young men are actually more at risk for suicide than girls and women. But also risk factors include living alone, dropping out from school, but also certain regions in the Netherlands are more, I would say, risk regions, including Groningen. And we actually know very little about why that is, but we do know that we are here, we have a higher risk. So suicidal behaviors and loneliness. Well, I should say first that suicidal thoughts and behaviors are very multifaceted in nature. So there is not one cause of suicidality. I mean, you can think, for instance, I would say most suicide researchers would agree that you would need to look into, for instance, childhood trauma, childhood maltreatment, psychological makeup, including emotion regulation, but also sociologists who tell you about how society operates and what kind of future society will influence the suicide rate. And biologists will tell you need to look into genetics as well if you want to understand suicide. So it is very much a multi-causal issue. Yet we do see that loneliness, even though it's not the only cause, we do see that it is quite a robust predictor of suicidal thoughts. I found a recent study showing that in 93 countries, those young people who endorsed feeling lonely frequently had significant higher rates of suicidal thoughts. Now, why is this the case? So what is the link between suicidality and loneliness? Then I think in this case, it's very helpful to talk about, I would say, one of the most influential theories in the field, which is the interpersonal theory of suicide by Thomas Joyner and Kim van Orden. It's a theory with three components: thwarted belongingness, burdensomeness, and the acquired capability for suicide. And you can see that the link, well, there are more links than just one, but the link between loneliness and the model by Joyner and van Orden is mostly to do with the thwarted belongingness concept. I will say a few more things about the model. So, thwarted belongingness is really to do with the feeling that you lack connection, so you feel alone. You feel that the care the relationships you have are not, you're not mutual. It doesn't feel mutual, so there is no reciprocal care experienced. And as for the burdensome component, that's mostly to do with people who say that they feel like a burden. So they feel also that they themselves are to be blamed for the stress they may cause to others, to their families or their loved ones. They feel they are to blame for that, and because of this, also self-hatred might develop. So if you combine that with hopelessness, the desire for suicide may emerge. But Joyner and van Orden say that there's an essential third component that would need to be in place if people sort of want to cross that line and actually go on to make a suicide attempt. Then they say there needs to be what they call acquired capability of suicide, by which they mean that people need to have a lowered fear of death, because most of us will find it very scary to harm yourself. So there should be some process that has happened in your life where you have a lowered fear of death and an increased pain tolerance. Now, I can say more about it, but I first want to move on with some other elements. Yes, so as for interventions, so what can we do about suicidal feelings? How can we help people who feel suicidal? And how can we help people who feel lonely? And is there an overlap there? Well, there is. I've listed 1 to 4 are the interventions that loneliness researchers have researched and have listed as interventions that are often used to do something about loneliness. So, for instance, improving social skills, enhancing social support, increasing opportunities for social contact and for interaction, but also I think this is also to do with what Hanna told us, try to address the maladaptive social cognition. So these ideas that people say, I'm not worth it to have contact with someone because I'm just not interesting. Well, those kind of thoughts or ideas can be challenged. Loneliness researchers also found out that there's somewhat more support for number 2 and 3 than for the others. So apparently those social support and interaction-focused intervention are among the most promising ones, even though researchers also agreed that it is hard, of course, to really combat those feelings of loneliness. But they're quite promising interventions. And I should say that also in the field of suicide research, suicide prevention research, the number 2 and 3, I would say, are also among the most promising candidates. I would say that's probably to do also because it taps into to decreasing the feelings of, it enhances belongingness and it combats the feeling of the lack of connectedness that Joyner also talked about. And to add to that, I would say interventions more specific for suicide prevention are, for example, safety planning and reduction of means. So I think that's quite specific for the field of suicide prevention. And they're quite well evidenced intervention measures. So that means safety planning means that you actually try sit down with the person and together you discuss. So how can we keep you safe when you enter a suicidal crisis? How can we make sure that we keep you as safe as possible? Of course, this should be done together and in conversation with the person, not for them. Reduction of means is very much to do with how can we make dangerous means? How can we make them as far away as possible from persons who might feel suicidal? Think, for instance, of safety nets, or for instance, high buildings will need to have some preventive measures in place so that people can't easily jump from them. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to move towards the end of my presentation, and I'm going to show you a video clip that I find both very moving. It's I can hardly even, I've seen it for more than 10 times, but it still makes me cry. So it's very moving, but it's also very hopeful. So I do, I would say hang in there because it has a very positive end. And I show you the clip because it really taps into these elements of social connection, interaction, that we can have with people in despair. So I'm going to show it to you now. Hopefully the technical, there it comes.
Attention passengers on platform 11. I'm sorry to announce that there's been a serious incident on the line. We know that there was one individual involved. She was 28-year-old Sarah Wilson. Sarah left a note before leaving her house because she had decided to take her own life. But I'm very pleased to tell you, she didn't go through with it because someone took the time to stop and talk to her. That was all it took to interrupt Sarah's suicidal thoughts. I know this because I am Sarah. I'm sharing my story today to spread an important message. That a little small talk can be all it takes to help start someone on a journey to recovery. So if you think someone might need help, trust your instincts. Stop and have a chat. Even a question about the weather can be enough. Or tell a member of staff. You could help save a life.
Yeah, so I wanted to say a few more things about this film clip. It was, so I think it really shows the importance of interaction and of having contact with someone. And you might say, well, is it really as simple as that? Because, you know, someone might have felt so down and low and suicidal for a long time. And can it really be, you know, as simple as talking to someone? But what we know from research is that many people who feel suicidal are ambivalent. Yeah, so very few people have a straightforward death wish. So we know that it's often more of a mixed bag of motives that people have and feel. So yes, they want to die, but they also, well, they have maybe, you know, they have maybe someone who they wonder, like, what will it be like for them if I die? So they might have some, you know, some relationships still going, which make them doubt. And also, I think, it's maybe a philosophical answer, but I mean, we cannot simply know what is ahead of us when we die, because we cannot interview anyone who has died. So we don't know what is ahead of us. So people will not know what is waiting for them when they continue. So all of this contributes to their ambivalence. And when we talk to people who we suspect are suicidal, we appeal to this ambivalence. And by doing that, we buy time. And time is very important in suicide prevention, because we also know that people are often not suicidal 24 hours per day, but it sort of follows, you know, more of an up and down pattern. So if you make an appeal to the ambivalence, you can buy time and thereby potentially save lives. So that's very encouraging. Here the take-home message is really, we have a very diverse mixed background of suicidal behaviors, ranging from, you know, from psychology to sociology to genetics and so on. We have found quite robust links between loneliness and suicidal thoughts. And we've also seen that especially those interventions where you tap into social support and social interactions can be quite promising in both fields, I think. But of course, we do need more research to see what works for whom. And thinking of Lucia's talk, maybe also what works for whom and where, in which cultural context. And again, the appeal to ambivalence is important when you're reaching out to people in suicidal crisis. And as we also picked up, I hope, from this clip, is this not just mental health care who can help us. Of course, I'm super happy with psychiatrists like Hanna and all of her good work. But we, as people, as friends, as people who are just passengers in a train station, can also do some of the share. I also want to show you a few. I'm not sure how visible this is, but I wanted to show you just a few options that, if you feel you're down, you're low, and you're feeling, perhaps you're feeling suicidal, or you know of a friend, here are some websites or some resources you could use. And if I'm not mistaken, the organization will also put this on the website, so you can for sure also check it out. And most of the initiatives I mentioned here are free of charge, so that's also good. And quite a few of them are actually, they're accessible online, so super easy and low threshold. With this, I think I'd like to end. So thank you, and take good care of each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much for 3 very interesting and I think also touching talks. Indeed, good to mention these help sources. If you worry about yourself or others, I think the 113 online is a good one to always remember. You can always reach out in any doubt. May I invite the speakers to the high table so that we can open the floor for questions. If you have a question, raise your hand, and Annelies here at the front will come to you and you can ask your question. If I may start with a question to the 3 panelists, actually. What really caught me, yes, especially in the first talk by Luzia, talking about this adaptive capacity. Do you think we miss out on the signal of loneliness as a source of also motivation or a need? And we often see it as kind of an endpoint or a result of being in a certain situation. But do you think that the fact that people indeed feel this mismatch or this conflict in their current situation and their wish situation actually is also something that may start a road to recovery? And I think it's a question also to Hanna and maybe also Diana.
I honestly don't know, but I think what I hear many participants say in hindsight is that for them loneliness was meaningful in a broader sense, so not only to reconnect with others, because most of the time, even though theoretically this is how loneliness is often viewed, I've hardly ever talked to someone who said I needed more relationships and I needed actually to kind of connect to other people, or I needed to fix my relationship. But very often it was actually in the people that I talked to more a phase of their lives. It was kind of in reaction to a situation such as a move or something like that. So I've hardly ever actually seen in practice this loneliness as an adaptive sign that really motivated people to fix something in their relationships. But still, people often talked about loneliness as something very insightful for personal development, and really a phase that was very tough, but also something that made them into the person that they were later on. But it's actually a very interesting question, given that it's often presented as an adaptive signal. But now that I talk about it, I actually realize not many people seem to really talk about it like that themselves.
You're happy with that answer? Hanna, you?
Just something that occurs to me when after this question is something that also Diana said, like suicidal thoughts, also depression is quite multifaceted. So you have multiple risk factors, and in one patient you may see that loneliness may play an important role, but in others it may be genetic risk factors. And so with each patient we try to find out what are the combinations of risk factors that together may influence people's symptoms here. Oftentimes, people don't think immediately about loneliness when we talk about it, but during conversations, we may get to that. And not that we always say it directly like, oh, you're very lonely, but people may say, well, actually I have relationships with people that I don't find very, that are not very strong, or that I cannot really be myself. And so that's something that we try to work on if we look at loneliness. But I also don't see it really as adaptive in my case, but I see it as a risk factor, basically, that can play a role.
Yep. Thank you. I think there was a question here in the audience.
Hi. Thank you. I loved all the presentations. I have a question for Luzia. I have many, but I'm going to pick one or two, depending on the time. So why do people feel that, like when you ask the questions about the myths, many people have strongly raised their hands that they believe that loneliness has actually increased? Do you think that could have been due to confirmation bias? Many people might have felt lonely, so they think that it might increase.
I think that one reason is, so thank you for the question, first of all. And I think that one reason is that in many societies, more and more people live alone. So indeed, certain indicators of social isolation increase. And because in people's minds, they tend to mix up loneliness and being alone or social isolation, people automatically infer from that people nowadays feel much lonelier than in the past and have many more feelings of loneliness. I think another factor is that we talk about loneliness more. So loneliness is a much more, present theme now in the media, especially also through COVID. So I feel like this also adds to the perception that feelings of loneliness have increased. So I think that these are two important trends. And also, of course, we don't really have very solid data that suggests that loneliness has not increased. And we also don't have solid data that loneliness would have decreased. It's just not that we have very solid data that it has increased. And in the studies that were conducted, it seemed not so clear also. Yeah.
Yes, there's a question here at the front.
Yeah, thank you. I also very much enjoyed the talk, and I have a little bit close question. It's like a math question, because the definition of loneliness is the discrepancy between received companionship, the gap between perceived companionship and desired companionship. So usually, of course, if the perceived companionship is less than the desired one, you feel lonely. This way I can understand. But I'm also wondering the reversed one. So there are circumstances people actually received companionship is far more than their desired companionship, and do they also feel lonely? And in your study about anxiety and depression, also suicidal things. So because like in the interventions, you also mentioned that it usually we try to increase their social support, increase their social ties. So I'm wondering, so first, if people have more companionship than their desired amount, do they feel lonely? And if they feel lonely, do they also have the high risk of mental health issues?
Thanks a lot. I will start again. Very interesting question. I've never got this question, and I love it. And I do just basically concluding from the interviews I've conducted, I would say yes, that can also lead to loneliness. We talked about it actually before the Studium Generale, that I had participants who told me that they had a lot of different social interactions, but they often did not feel so understood in these interactions. So they said I scattered myself quite a bit over these different interactions. And then my participant called it that she started practicing relationship hygiene, which meant that she basically let the relationships go in which she did not feel so connected and understood. And that really helped her deal with loneliness. I think this is one thing. Another thing is also that I have talked to people who are more introverted, that then it can happen that you actually get quite socially exhausted. and through this social exhaustion by hanging out with other people more than actually what you can do, you start feeling very disconnected. So you are with people, but you really feel not connected at all. And that can, again, also lead to loneliness. So I think there can be situations in which also, let's say, discrepancy in the other direction might cause loneliness.
Yeah, I also, I've not seen many people in clinical practice that had too many social contacts, but I can imagine that sometimes people may have difficulties in saying no, for instance. If, for instance, you made an appointment with a friend, but you're really, really tired, you don't feel well, and then that you never want to say no. So in terms of how you deal with all your social contacts, I don't see many people that have too many, but if you always try to please other people, that actually may lead to, that you don't take good care of yourself and that you then feel worse, basically. And especially when you also feel your contacts are not of high quality, that you cannot really show yourself. That I can imagine that also will lead to more feelings of depression, for instance. Thank you.
Yeah, I can say a few things. I also love the question. I also rarely get it, or no, never. But I think it's not a very well-researched question in suicide studies, but it does remind me of, well, I would say that's more of a hypothesis, like why are suicidal thoughts increasing among young people? And then, it's often suggested that social media plays a role, and of course, if those a large number of social ties you have are mostly on social media, it can bear a risk of social comparison and social perfectionism, and that has been linked to suicidal thoughts. So there might be something there, but I would say it's not very well researched.
Hello. Thank you again for the presentation. It's just a practical question. Could we have the link of the video of Sarah Wilson, I think? Yeah?
Absolutely.
It's
It's freely available also on YouTube, but it will also be put in the on the website of the Studium Generale.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Here's the question. Is it okay?
Yeah.
So I have a question more about because you said that it doesn't really matter if individuals are in a collectivistic culture or in an individualistic culture, and then just now you were also talking about boundaries a little bit, so that. I feel like now it's more normalized for people to have more boundaries and say no, for example, if friends would ask to hang out. And I feel like this is also, kind of a byproduct of the individualistic culture, that people are, taking time for themselves. But I was really wondering how this would have an influence on loneliness as well, because people would look more at themselves and less at the community, as they do in collectivistic culture. So then in a collectivistic culture, maybe people feel like they can always build upon each other. And in individualistic cultures, people have this feeling less.
Yeah, thank you also for that question. I couldn't go into a lot of depth, of course, in this talk. I think what is maybe important to understand is that within different cultures, people still are quite different from each other, and people have different needs. So usually certain cultural norms or values, let's say, benefits a certain group and they disadvantage another group. So certain risk factors, as I said, are increased and others are decreased. And sometimes, for instance, for people who are more introverted, it can be beneficial if they can actually start to set their boundaries. Whereas for people who actually rely on being in much contact with others, if then other people start setting their boundaries, they actually lack what they need in social relationships. So it's very complex actually, because certain risk factors in certain cultures are increased and others are decreased, and at the same time also risk factors are associated with loneliness in different ways in different cultures. So what I also mentioned, social isolation, for instance, can get a different meaning in a more individualistic culture or more collectivistic culture. It might be less strongly associated with loneliness in an individualistic than in a collectivistic culture. So I don't have a very concrete answer to your question, because probably some groups will benefit from the option to set their own boundaries, namely those who are easily overstimulated, who actually like to spend time alone, which exists in all cultures, while others who are more dependent on communities and really spending time together and really gatherings happening with a lot of people consistently being present will probably have a disadvantage and feel lonelier through it. So it's always certain groups will benefit and others will maybe have a disadvantage from it. Yeah.
We have time for one last short question. I think there was one in the back. I don't know if your question is short, but if you can keep it short, that would be great.
I would like to thank all the speakers. It was really insightful. And also I have a question to Hanna, because in the first talk we heard a lot of distinctions between social isolation and loneliness. And I was wondering your opinion if these two things may have different psychological basis, and if you think that it's important to distinguish them and maybe psychiatric genetics or all of this lifeline studies. Yeah, what's your opinion? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think it is very useful to have this distinction between people's social networks. So basically, how socially isolated are you? It's sort of an objective measure, but also in the experience of loneliness, as we just heard. What we sometimes do, for instance, in interpersonal psychotherapy, that we look at the person and his and her network. So the people, we just sketch which people are close to you, which people are far away from you, and how would you describe your relationships. So you can actually see then visually, is this person's network, is it big, is it small, but also how is it perceived? So how does someone describe their personal relationships? And then you can actually find out, like, where could we work on? So suppose we find out that you have a few good social relationships, and if you talk with these people, you don't feel lonely at all, but they are just a few people, then you can maybe extend your network a bit and work with people or connect with people that are not yet in your network. But it could also be the opposite, that you have a very rich network, but you miss some sort of type of relationship, like a very intimate relationship, for instance. So I think it's very important to look at these different aspects. Yes.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we don't have more time for questions, but the speakers will be here. So if you have your question, you want to ask it face to face, I hope, and I hope that you're all available for a short talk. Now, before we close this evening, I'd like to invite Vardau Mulder. She's the assistant director from the theatre play to tell a bit about the play Beautiful Mess. So please join me.
Yeah, so what an honor to close this evening with amazing talks. So I'm from AWay Productions, of which you saw a short scene of the new production Beautiful Mess. And I hope the intense and amazing acting already persuaded you to buy a ticket to our show. Also, you will get a discount code in your email after this lecture, so that might also persuade you. But if that doesn't persuade you, I will tell you a little bit more about it. So I'm from AWay Productions. We've been making theater productions in English since 2016. And I've been with the group since the beginning in 2016 with one of my best friends. And we don't only talk about theater, we also talk a lot about all our... we don't only talk about theater, we also talk a lot about our personal struggles. When we feel lonely, or when we feel insecure, if we don't know where our life is going or where we want it to go. We had a coffee over that this afternoon. And also when we feel socially anxious, for example, when I'm at a network event and I'm sure no one wants to talk to me, but they do want to talk to everyone else because I have nothing interesting to say. I guess these type of feelings are familiar to you on some level. And these social insecurities, we thought this is what we want to make a play about, because everyone experiences them, or so I hope. I'm not alone in this. But we talk about it not enough to each other. And I can say from a non-scientific perspective, it really helps to talk about them. So we thought about this and quickly decided to make a play about normal people. The book from Sally Rooney and the miniseries from the BBC. And I would like to ask who read and or saw Normal People? Oh, that's not... Okay, I would definitely recommend you to read the book or watch the series. Because it's great, it's amazing. At first glance, it might seem like a simple teenage romance novel. It's about two people, Marianne and Connell, in Dublin, and they fall in love with each other. And they really want to be with each other because they have their own personal struggles. Already touched a bit upon the youth, difficult youth from Marianne. Connell's really insecure and can't share his emotions. They really want to be with each other. They're really of great help to each other. But they can't. They struggle to. And that's actually because they can't share their emotions. They're too afraid of the rejection of the other to really cherish the connection they have. And these feelings sometimes seem small, but I think everyone knows that when you experience them yourself, feeling lonely, feeling misunderstood, wanting to say to someone, I really need a hug right now, but you don't dare to because maybe they will say no. When you experience these feelings, they're huge. They're the most important thing in that moment. So that's what the play is about. Beautiful Mess. We perform 13th, 14th and 15th of June. So please come and watch and see more of the acting you already saw this evening. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Vardau. Thank you very much for playing here live to us. It was not on video, it was even better. Thank you all for being here. It was great that you listened and engaged with the speakers in your questions. Please talk to each other also about this topic and talk to the speakers here. I'd also like to announce the next lecture. I think you will now. Oh, it's not there. Okay, there will be Monday, 2nd of June. So that's already next week. The title of the evening is "Extremist Labor for AfD: What are the consequences?" And Eva Chavant will talk about it. And the location is not here, but it's in the Mariloke Harmonie building. So please, if you like going to Studium evenings next week, the next one is up. Then there's a QR code. You can, if you'd like to help us with giving us your opinion about these evenings or share your experience, here's the QR code to be directed to a short survey. And as already promised, you will receive a code or a voucher for a discount on a theater ticket, but I'm sure it's worth the full amount, so I will not make use of it, and I will try to come. Thanks very much. Have a great evening, have a great week, and I hope, stay connected, I think is a good message for tonight. Thank you.
Heel hartelijk dank.